Once we've completed the needs analysis, moving into the phase of establishing training objectives should be a relatively fluid transition. Essentially, what we're doing here is taking those identified needs and turning them into actionable goals for the training program. It's important that objectives be clear, specific, and measurable. Goals that are nebulous or vague won't provide a clear course of action. As we know from goal-setting theory, specificity enhances the effectiveness of a goal. Not only do you have clarity on what you're aiming for, but it also makes it easier to track progress and measure success at the end. So in our example, one goal might be to reduce data entry errors from 27% to 3%. Another one might be to reduce call time from 10 minutes to 5 minutes to get the staff to resolve the issues more quickly. These would both be examples of objectives that are clear, specific, and measurable. Once you've set your training objectives, it's time to design the program. The science behind training program design integrates many different areas of psychology: cognitive, social, the science of memory, and the science of learning. And this is one of the reasons why psychology graduates are so employable in this space and often go on to do this type of work because they have this core knowledge. So here are some factors that we need to consider that influence training design. First off, encoding. You'll recall from your cognitive psychology courses that encoding is the art of taking in information. When it comes to training, it's all about balance. Make a training too hard and attendees may feel overwhelmed, leading to less effective information encoding. Too easy and attendees might just drift off and find it hard to stay on task. That's why a training needs analysis is crucial, to strike the right balance and ensure the cognitive load is not too high and not too low. Then there's memory and schema formation. Essentially, this means connecting new knowledge to what trainees already know. Say you're introducing a new IT system. Instead of starting from scratch, you might say, remember how you used to do this function in the old system? Well, here's an updated way on the new system. So you're not just building a new road, you're just paving an existing one. Also relevant are constructive processes. In simple terms, practice. You can't just impart information on people and expect them to be able to go back to their work roles and perform. They need to have the opportunity to put what they've learned into action. Last, feedback, which again stems from goal-setting theory. The evidence is overwhelming that people learn much better when they have feedback about how they're tracking and how they can improve. But there are still some unanswered questions about how we can make feedback most effective. What type of feedback should we give? Should we use critical feedback, which highlights mistakes, or constructive feedback? The consensus is that both are essential. The more insights you can give the employee from that feedback, the better the results. What about the timing of feedback? The evidence suggests that frequent and immediate feedback is key. The sooner the feedback, the stronger the link to the action, leading to better learning outcomes. When we think carefully about how to design training programs, a few important questions arise that determine their success. So let's get into these and attempt to unravel the psychology behind effective training. Should we start with easier or harder content? Some studies advocate for the former, stating that easy tasks can boost learners' confidence for subsequent challenges. However, there's a flip side. If tasks are too easy, the learners may lose interest. There's also the question of whether to train the whole or divide the task up into parts. The answer appears to be that it's better to train the whole. Imagine training someone to weld. Would you teach them the welder's mechanics separate from the actual welding process? Probably not. It's generally more effective to train comprehensively, ensuring the training mirrors real-life application. The final element to consider is whether you want to teach theory, general principles, or how to behave in specific situations. Take our customer service team, for instance. Do we prep trainees for exact call scenarios or give them overarching complaint handling strategies? Ideally, both. Specific examples are valuable for learning how to handle frequent challenges, while broader strategies are helpful more in novel situations where you have less experience to draw on. When designing a training program, it's also important to understand the kind of knowledge you're aiming to impart. First, there's declarative knowledge. Think of this as the what. It's about facts, like knowing Canberra is Australia's capital. This type of knowledge requires conscious thought. In professions like medicine, doctors rely heavily on this type of knowledge to connect symptoms to diagnoses. But there's also procedural knowledge. This is the how. It's the skill set, like driving a car or drawing blood. Over time, with practice, these tasks become second nature. They become automatic. The goal with this type of knowledge is to master it to the point where it feels instinctive. Recognizing the difference between these two types of knowledge is vital. It sets realistic expectations for what training can achieve. So are we focusing on the what or the how? Knowing this shapes our approach. Kolb's classic model of adult learning beautifully merges the foundational science with applied practice. Many folks working in the training domain swear by these principles. The general idea in adult learning theory is that the learner is an active participant in the learning process. One of the main things that came out of the theory was the concept of learning styles that you might have heard about. And here's the taxonomy that was developed to describe these styles. This model has two dimensions. The first dimension is this horizontal axis, which distinguishes people based on how they do things. On the left is people who learn by doing and who prefer what they call active experimentation. On the right is people who prefer to learn by watching or observing, what they call reflective observation. The vertical dimension distinguishes people based on how they think about things. So on the bottom are people who like to learn by abstract conceptualization, so thinking through the general principles that underlie different sorts of problems. On the top are people who are much more about concrete experience and feeling, so they prefer the more experience-based learning style. And based on these dimensions, there's a prescription for how to train these types of people. So people in the top left quadrant, they need to feel and do. If there's someone who's in the top right and high on concrete experience and reflective observation, they need to feel and watch. In the bottom left quadrant, people who prefer active experimentation and abstract conceptualization, they need to think and do. And finally, people who prefer reflective observation and abstract conceptualization, they need to think and watch. Unfortunately, research consistently shows that trying to tailor content to specific learning styles doesn't necessarily boost learning. Instead, it's beneficial to deliver content in varied modes. It's not about catering to individual learning styles, it's about everyone gaining from multiple exposures in diverse ways. For example, in the meta-analysis on leadership development we discussed a few weeks ago, they showed that multimodal training had the best results. This holds true for various training programs. Think about this course. Lectures, videos, readings, discussions, and tutorials and assignments that give you opportunities for practice. These all provide different angles on the same content, reinforcing and enhancing learning. All right, let's talk about some common training methods. Your textbook categorizes these into on-site and off-site techniques. One type of on-site training is on-the-job training. Remember your first day of work. Often you're learning on the go, sometimes under the wing of a seasoned colleague. This can be useful, but there's a catch. Its success depends on how knowledgeable and patient your colleague is. Another on-site method is job rotation. You might remember this from our lecture on motivation. Rotating tasks keeps people engaged because they're constantly learning. It's not just motivating, but also a great training tool. And then we have what we call vestibule training. This is where you might be practicing in some isolated area, where if you make a mistake, it's not going to have any real consequences. It's like practicing driving in an empty car park, a safe space to make mistakes. There's also apprenticeship, where you're combining work with formalized training. And then there's also off-site methods, which are typically held somewhere external to your work environment. Examples of these are things like lectures or workshops. You also might see behavior modeling. This is about watching and learning, like seeing someone demo a task and then attempting it yourself. And then there's web-based training. These are common, especially for safety protocols. Take UQ's fire safety module, for instance. The hurdle here is keeping the learner engaged when Instagram is just a click away. It's worth noting that training is particularly crucial for managers, given their roles. In a managerial training, you might see things like developmental assessment centers, which are like the assessment centers we spoke about last week on selection, but this time they're set up to train existing employees. You might also see case studies where trainees have to solve realistic problems, analyzing organizational issues and brainstorming solutions, sometimes as a team. It's also common to see role-playing in these types of trainings, where trainers and trainees act out scenarios. These are exceptionally useful for honing interpersonal skills. Management games are sometimes used to develop decision-making skills. And group discussions are often held, where trainees share insights and learn from their peers. An important part of any training, but that is particularly relevant to managerial training, is active learning, where people learn by doing. And mentoring, which is an older concept, but always useful. Managers play a central role in administration, coordination, and motivation, so organizations often invest a lot in their training. Often when organizations earmark funds for training, onboarding new hires is at the top of the list. This isn't just a welcome to the company thing. It's a crash course into the company's values, ethos, and the unwritten rules of how things are done around here, touching on things like safety protocols, organizational norms, and clear role definitions. Organizations see these things as absolutely essential. A few tips on designing an effective onboarding. Think like a new hire. They're likely eager, maybe a bit nervous, and keen to make a solid first impression. So ensure that the environment feels welcoming. And recognize that compared to training the old-timers, fresh hires might feel more vulnerable. So you might need to do more to make them feel relaxed, secure, and psychologically safe. Also, get all that admin and paperwork sorted digitally or before they step in on day one. This way, face-to-face onboarding time becomes interactive, engaging, and invaluable, with room for queries and clarifications.